What's up, guys? We got a very special video for you today. We're going to be going over some advice that all short and small wide receivers need to hear. So we're going to be talking about how smaller wide receivers can beat bigger physical DBs and linebackers that are stronger than them, bigger than them. We're going to talk about some tips out of the slot because I know a lot of you guys work out of the slot if you're on the shorter side of things. So I hope this video helps you guys out. Hope you learn a few new things from it. But also, fellas, we are coming out to 15 states this offseason for 2-day long QB and wide receiver camp. So check out that very first link in the description below if you'd like to sign up and train with us. We're going to be coming out to San Francisco, California. That camp is completely sold out, but then we'll be coming out to Miami, Florida, Las Vegas, Nevada, Charlotte, North Carolina, Portland, Oregon, Dallas, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, Chicago, Illinois, Buffalo, New York. Then we'll be heading out to Houston, Texas, Atlanta, Georgia, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Detroit, Michigan, Boise, Idaho, and Los Angeles, California. So again, if you'd like to train with us, fellas, check out that link in the description below. Let's get back to this video. All right, guys, so the first thing that I would like to talk about for short and smaller wide receivers is the concept of range. So this is going to be a writer from Josh Downs. Now, Josh Downs is matched up against a DB who looks a little bit on the heavier side of things, probably a little bit stronger than Downs, probably definitely a little bit bigger than him, and he has to run this 5-yard out route versus this inside shade, kind of like off-man coverage DB right on the goal line. So what this DB is taught to do is to not backpedal, right? Anytime that a DB is on the goal line, he is taught to just sit right there, be patient, and maintain that inside leverage. So if I have to run a 5-yard out route, obviously what we're not going to do is just take off and go run the 5-yard out route to the outside because this DB will get hands, he will squeeze me to the sideline, or just be right on my hip, and that's a tough throw for that quarterback. So what we're going to do is we're going to attack his leverage to the inside. We're going to close the distance with him. We're going to bring the line of scrimmage to the DB. We know he's not going to backpedal, so I have to do something called keep some range between me and him. So let's watch this route full speed. So he comes off the ball, and you see when he makes that move, he's not right up on the DB's toes. Like, guys, as a wide receiver who's on the smaller side of things, our game is not going to be getting physical and getting hands on the DB. That's not how we play the position. That's not what we're going to have success with because these defenders, especially safeties, especially if you're out of the slot, and we're going to talk a lot about slot receivers as this video goes on and some things that you need to understand if you're a smaller slot going up against linebackers, but we'll get to that. But again, our game is not being physical, and this DB is taught to get hands on us and try to be physical. So if we close too much distance and we don't leave some range, we're not going to be able to get separation. This is plenty of a wide receiver closing the distance. We don't want to get too close to where he gets hands and is able to jam and reroute me. Now, same thing goes off the line, right? Like, let's say this DB is walked up a little bit closer and maybe he's about 2 yards away. When I go attack his leverage to the inside and try to get him to move off the platform, I'm not stepping right on his toes to get physical. I am maintaining some distance. I think of it a lot like fighting. Like boxers and fighters, what they have a lot, they talk about range with a boxer and a fighter. How long is the fighter's arms, right? So you could stay out of his range, right? If you stay here, you're out of his range. He's got to come at you to get hands. And that's what we want to do with my releases and my moves as a shorter wide receiver. Let's stay out of his range. So that's a great example there from Downs. Let's watch the thing full speed one more time. Make sure we keep that space, fellas. Do not get too close to where they could jam and reroute. So if we are a smaller wide receiver, especially out of the slot, right? If you're a shorter guy, like let's say you're under 6 foot, for example, you're probably at the next level, college level, going to be playing out of the slot. There are not too many outside wide receivers, especially at the Division I level, that are, below 6'1", I would say, which is crazy to say because like 6 foot 6'1" in high school is usually an outside wide receiver. You're probably going to be more naturally a slot guy if you're 5'11", 5'10", 5'9". So as a slot receiver, there are certain things that you need to understand. And one of those concepts is going to be safety help with your routes. So you see how this wide receiver is lined up with a DB who's in off-man coverage. This is the other safety on the field. They got a single high safety. They're probably running some kind of like cover one concept where they have man coverage across the board, right? And I'm going to show the up-close example of this, like kind of like the end zone camera in a second, but I wanted to show the aerial view so you guys could see and read the coverage. So he comes up to the ball. He sees that we have outside shade coverage. That means that the DB has help to the inside. So this wide receiver is going to be running a post. This goes for the same thing on a post, on a dig, on a curl. What do you think he has to do versus this off-man coverage? Do you think he just wants to take off and run? No, because that's what that DB wants. That's going to run right into that safety help, and that's a smaller window for the quarterback. We want to increase the throwing window for the quarterback. So on his route, he's got to stem this DB to the outside and threaten his outside leverage to create a bigger window. So that's exactly what he does, and let's play at full speed. So he runs up, he uses a rocker step move, and I want you to see. Now, this is a good The quarterback does a good job too as well here. His eyes start to the left, which will get that safety moving to the left, but still, that safety's not an idiot. As soon as he sees that quarterback start looking to the right, he is on a dead break to this route over the middle because he knows that when he's single high, quarterbacks love to look off a single high free safety. So if we run a crappy route and we're not helping our quarterback out, that makes it very tough for me out of the slot. If we just take off and go run, that's very easy for that safety to make that recovery. So we have to stem to the outside. He works this DB to the outside. He angles his route towards him. That's what stemming is called, and he uses this rocker step cut to sell like he's running a corner, sell like he's running an out route, because a DB and outside shade, what is he taught not to give up? The outside. So let's make it look like an outside route. So I'm going to show, like I said, the end zone example, but you see that safety's here. If he was just 2 more steps over the middle, that safety either has a chance to make a play on the ball, we're getting killed because he's hitting me, or it's a pick if we run a bad route. So it's a combination of quarterback play and wide receiver play. So let's look at the end zone example here, right? Again, this is a great example of this rocker step. Sells to the outside, gets that DB off his platform. Doesn't get a ton of separation either, but just enough of a window to where that safety doesn't have a chance. That's how you can make yourself reliable out of the slot, fellas. If you're a smaller guy, you need to have some creativity to your routes, and you need to know how to play out of the slot. I know some outside wide receiver, me personally, I think it's a little bit easier in terms of having to read certain read certain DBs, run certain routes, come up with a plan off the line. But if you can execute out of the slot, and out of the slot, you will see a lot of outside shade off man, a lot of outside shade press. And if you could get separation and learn how to manipulate safety help, you will be a huge, huge asset to your team. So let's play both of these clips full speed one more time. This is a great example, guys. This is slot manipulation 101. Good rocker step, good attacking leverage, way to give that quarterback a throwing window for us to be able to see, or for the quarterback to be able to see. Now, this next example here, comes down to us not forcing our routes. So you as a wide receiver want to take the path of least resistance when it comes down to running your routes. What do I mean by that? I mean that you do not want to force anything that we do not have to, especially against a DB who is bigger and more physical than I am, right? So if you got a DB who's lined up, you see how this guy's a little bit inside shade. Now, I don't think this DB is the greatest in the first place, but let's say it's a disciplined DB, really talented guy, and he's inside shade, and you have to run an inside breaking route like a dig. So many receivers have been taught for years. Inside route, post, curl, dig. Got to get an inside release. Incorrect. Not true. Terrible advice. Because this DB, when he's inside shade, goal is to not let you get an inside release. So if you just give like a weak jab to the outside and then go inside, that DB's not going to give it up. He's going to take something called a leverage step, protect his leverage, not allow us to get to the inside, and then you're going to be constantly fighting to try to get to the outside of him. You break, and guess what? The spacing of the play's over. He was getting hands the entire time, so the timing is off with the quarterback, and then we're screwed, for lack of a better term, right? So what we need to do is take the pass of least resistance, which is an outside release, even when I have to run an inside breaking route. So let's watch this thing full speed. So he comes off, gives a move, takes the outside release, and his separation came at the top of the route. That's where we get open. You do not get open with your press release, fellas. If you have a deep route, right? If you have like a slant route, like that's a different story because you could use like a diamond release and go. But if you have a route that's deeper than 5 yards, you get open at the top of the route, not off the line. Off the line, your move, your release, that is to keep timing with your QB and spacing on the play. So you see how he comes off the ball. He attacks him to the inside, gives a little like crossover move. Threatens this DB like he is running to the inside. And remember, this guy's goal, the best way to get a DB to move, threaten him where he does not want you to go. So he doesn't want us to go to the inside. Let's make him think we're going to the inside because that's the best way to get him to move. So we move him off the platform a little bit. We take the outside release. Now what do we try to do? We should try to stack him, right? Stacking is when we get this DB to trail my back hip like so. And that's an easy money separation because you could just give like a little rocker step fake, a little hip shift fake to the outside, and you see what that does to the DB. Now, what if the DB's disciplined? What if he's fast? What if he's strong? What if he's right on our hip? Because again, as a shorter guy, we usually face those guys like strong safeties, nickels, bigger dudes, physical guys who are athletes. Right on my hip, what do? Well, at the break point, remember, that's where we got to have a plan as well. And this plan at the break point is more of a reaction. But if he's right next to me, dude, I could put my hand on the back of his shoulder, back of his hip. I could drop my hips and still run that dig and use something called a throw by, where you take this inside hand and swat him by. So there's two ways to do it, fellas. You just got to keep this simple. Take the path of least resistance when you are a shorter wide receiver versus press coverage. That's a great example from this wide receiver running a dig versus inside shade press. Okay, so now remember what I said. As a shorter wide receiver, you need to have some creativity to your game. You cannot be just kind of one-dimensional, like boring route runner if you want to stand out, right? Like I'm talking like for guys who, want to play football at the next level, want to impress coaches. Let's talk about it, right? Like we have an interview on this channel where we talked to a former Michigan State wide receiver coach, and we were talking about recruiting. And he was telling me that at Michigan State, they did not pay attention a lot to the height of a wide receiver. They looked a lot at their speed, and they looked a lot at how they ran routes. Could they separate and could they get open? So if you're a shorter guy, like you're not going to fool anybody. You're not going to pass an eye test unless you're insanely fast. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say a college coach comes to your school or you go to a college camp. College coach isn't going to look at you and be like, oh, wow, that's a college football player, because you're short. You can't change it. Who cares? It's not a knock on anybody. It's just you're not going to be able to change it, right? So you have to do other things to stand out. And being creative with your routes is a great way to do that. Now, is this a release that I would probably teach a lot of guys? I would probably teach this release on like a drag route or maybe like a quick 5-yard in or a quick slant. I wouldn't necessarily do it on a 5-yard out, which is what this receiver does here, but it's good for you guys to see this and understand this concept of pairing your routes and your releases together. You want to make certain releases off the ball look like other releases that you've done maybe previously on film, in a game, in a practice, at a camp, whatever. And this is one of the best ways to stand out to a college coach. It shows you know how to run routes and you have the football IQ to run successful routes. So let's play this full speed. So this is like a dive release crossover. That's what I would call this release. Now, like I said, am I doing this on a 5-yard out? I probably would not teach this on a 5-yard out. Probably teach it on like a drag or something. A good guy to watch who does this a lot is Tyler Lockett, because Seahawks, they like to run a lot of mesh, or at least they used to. I'm not too familiar with their offense this year. But old Tyler Lockett film, they would run a lot of mesh and a lot of 5-yard outs, and they would run a lot of like over routes, like a lot of crossing routes, right? A lot of like what the Rams offense is. You see like Puka Nacua have a lot of success with that. But this release is something you could use for this. So like a dive release is like essentially where you dive to the inside, where out of a stance switch like this, if you have your inside foot up, it's only 2 steps. You step with your left foot, then you cut off of the right. Out of a stance switch, you would step with your right foot, left foot, and then break off the right. So it would be 3. So it's 2 to 3 steps. But it's essentially where you dive to the inside to make it look like a drag. So that's 1. You see how he goes 2, bam, 3. And what your goal is to get this DB to think that you're running a drag or a slant so you have more space to the outside. They call it a dive release. Some people call that a blade release. I've heard that term used before as well. So now this dive crossover, you make it look the exact same. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, you put the brakes on, and then you run your drag route. You run your in route, your slant, your deep over route, and you got some separation from this guy. So again, you can use this as a release, fellas. You could pair your releases together to have more success against DBs, and that really stands out to a college coach. What's another release you could use? Like you could do a little like slide release. If that DB stays there, you just take off and go, and then maybe run a dig. Like let's say you got to run a dig. You do a little slide release. This DB jumps way to the inside. You put the brakes on, take the outside release, and go run your dig. You just have to pair routes and releases together. If you guys can do that, you will be more successful. It'll showcase the type of routes that you can run, and you will be a better wide receiver for it.